Hi Mike, I don't know how I was lucky enough to make the list, but they called me and asked me if I'd say a few words about our friendship and the relationship we have. I'm honored to be part of this video, and thank you for all your friendship.
It was at a mutual gathering for a dinner. I don't think I had met him before, and it was down at 801 Shop House. And we were sitting with some mutual friends, and Simmonds were there, and Mike was not particularly happy with what his waiter brought out to him and the way it was either prepared or tasted, of course. And Mike, being Mike, kind of jumped on the guy. And I said, hey, ease up, lighten up on this guy. And of course, Simmonds later said, who is this guy? But since then, we've had a good give and take. Because he's been in the food business, he has a certain expectation. But now he'll say something, he finds himself getting surly if I happen to be there with him and go, okay, oh, I'm so lighten up a little bit. So that was the first time I met him, was at a mutual dinner for some friends. But I knew of him, but really did not know him. So I don't know if that was the best way to break the ice, but that's the way we did it.
Well, if you've never met Mike, it's hard to explain Mike. I mean, he is an exceptional individual in so many ways. You know, I think back when I first met him, which was, I don't want to say how many decades ago, and I thought of him just as a guy who operates a few Burger Kings, you know, no big deal. But certainly as I got to know him more, the Burger Kings were a big deal because it's Mike that's the big deal. And both as a very successful businessman and even more so as a person, and what I've seen him do over so many years, whether it's with friends, whether it's with charities, and whether it's with family. And he's just, I've never seen a guy who's so upbeat. Whenever I've been with him, it's just amazes me. The guy's always got a smile, and he's always got a joke, and he's just got an attitude that's beyond anything that I've seen in any other person. Very special person.
There are a couple things with the family that, you know, I'm not sure they were necessarily unique, but they were very important to him and to our family. We take an annual vacation, and we'd ski, do a lot of active things. He really wanted to experience the world with other people. So, you know, spending time together in new places was always important to him. And then family dinner every Sunday, whether we like it or not. He would make us dinner, and it was, you know, it was good. We got people together, and we still do it today.
There are quite a few funny stories about my dad, and I think really stories about his sense of humor and that display that are, I think of them often. A lot of them surround food, you know, maybe it's because he was in the food business, but for one thing, I remember being a little kid, maybe second grade, and you bring your lunches to school, and my mom packed me my lunch, and I got to school, and it was supposed to be peanut butter and jelly or something normal, but I opened it up and it was herring. And, you know, he would eat herring out of the jar, and it always grossed me out. So unbelievably, another little girl actually traded lunches, so it worked out okay. But it's still, that kind of thing's funny to us, maybe just because he thinks it's funny.
Mike is the ultimate entrepreneur. He's a man who I believe had the gift of starting businesses, building businesses, managing businesses, putting the right people around him, and helping businesses grow. And I think he also blessed a lot of people that he was able to put into management and give them opportunities to succeed as well. And there's not a lot of guys like Mike that have that gift, and I've watched him do that all of his life, and have always been very impressed by his skill.
He'll always tell you what he thinks, and it might be 3 o'clock in the morning when you get a text or an email, because he's not going to let it go. If there's a situation where maybe it was a challenging situation, he loves to get in the fight and go over things and get them resolved. But if he feels bad later, he'll come back to you and apologize. It's just an amazing person, and like I say, I could talk all day, but I don't know where to stop. Right.
My wife's favorite story, Sarah's favorite story, is he was once running late for a flight, and he had a rental car, and so he decided that instead of returning the rental car, he would just park it in the drop-off zone. He handed a bag drop the keys, and he went and caught his flight and figured that the rest would take care of itself, and sure enough it did.
Mike, we always talk a lot about Christmas and the Tree of Lights, but I just wanted to tell you that in my heart, Christmas never began until your Feed the Need breakfast on Christmas Eve day. Thanks, Mike.
And of course, he's the first one that taught me to try Scotch. I'm still trying it. He really wants me to. The first time we did the Scotch was in his office, and I had to keep adding more and more water to it. Of course, then he invited me, I think it was his 65th birthday that Moens put together, which was a Scotch tasting, and there was a few of us that aren't as big into Scotch as he and Moens and in that group are. So I'm still working to be a Scotch lover. I'll get there, Mike, one of these days. It's a slow process.
My personal favorite story is we invited Mike into our Scotch Club a couple of years ago, and he was a little disappointed with the food spread that we had there. So the story he told us was that on the way home he stopped at both Burger King and McDonald's and was able to satisfy his hunger. Subsequently, he had us over a few months later, and the spread was second to none. So not only did we drink well, we ate well too.
When we first met each other, it was a really rocky start. We were on a golf stag out in Colorado in the mountains, and we were at a dinner, and I was getting animated, as I sometimes do, and making a point, and I banged my hand on the table, and the fork flew up off where it was situated and hit him right in the head. And he, with not having a lot of hair on the front of his forehead, it started to bleed. I think it probably took 10 years for him to maybe forgive me for that. I'm not certain. But he'll even bring it up to this day, how we originally met. So it was a rocky start.
Well, I got to know Mike originally many years ago when he was first going into the food business in this area. He was going to build a Burger King at 16th and Broadway in Council Bluffs, and he had a fellow named by the name of Ron Gordon who he'd gone to put together a group of investors, and I was all for doing it. And in talking with Mike, it looked like a good deal, and somebody else undercut us, so we didn't get the deal. And by now I would be fully retired if I'd been able to get that Burger King, because it was a heck of a good deal.
I've been a great friend of Mike for 33 years this year. I got to meet him when I was I had a janitor business in his building over off of Dodge Street. And lo and behold, we became friends, Tim O'Brien, Gordy Hotman. So 3 great friends that I got out of that. Didn't get much else out of the Cleary business, but I sure did get 3 great friends.
We've grown a friendship that I don't have with many people, and he's a very special friend through all these years. We have some things in common. We're both entrepreneur, let's say. We both started with nothing and have made a life for ourselves with our families.
I think the biggest thing with Mike was his faithfulness to me. We started with the Omaha Alliance for the private sector, making some changes and trying to expose what we believed was wrongdoing in the city, and that led to recalling the mayor, and then sometime later it led to me running for mayor of Omaha. And Mike could have easily said, Nabity, I've had enough of you. You've been pushing for this and pushing for that, and we've had some success here and we haven't had any success there, and I'm just done. But he didn't do that. He knew the mission was right, and he was incredibly faithful to me. And he had other candidates that were running for mayor at the same time that he was close with too. He could have just said, look, I'm tapping out, I'm staying out of it, but he didn't. He stayed faithful to me, and I'll never forget him for that. I mean, very, very few people would step up and do what he did. And I mean, I have the warmest place in my heart for him for doing that.
You know, Mike's responsible for me sitting in this seat right now. He's responsible for me even being here in Omaha. I've lived all over the country, and 3 years ago took a position with the Salvation Army, which Mike at the time was the board chair. Him and and Lexi Sorensen are basically solely responsible for me, you know, being here in Omaha 3 years ago. From moved from San Diego, so took over as a director of a community center in North Omaha, which Mike led the charge of, and so that's why I sit here today. So,
but I was really loved school, and I was, in that respect, I was nerd and also super activity. But I was a little bit fearful of math, although I always got like hundreds. But for some reason, because get to this day, I get lost a lot geographically, like just finding my way around town and even around buildings. I feel like I have some sort of visual spatial deficit, and I'm not complaining. I'm just trying to explain the story. I had some major fear of geometry, beginning of sophomore year, you know, like age 14 or 15, and I was frozen. Like I could not do it. And I just remember sitting in the great room at my parents' house, like night after night, you know, multiple times a week, really whenever and however long I needed it. And he taught me geometry, and I still get lost today, but I did get the Geometry Award of the Year at Marion High School that year for that level of geometry. So, you know, he's helped me accomplish things that I used to, you know, fear. So,
I first met you, Mike, when I was a young volunteer, and I was volunteering for Creighton Prep's Bash, and I was chairing the oral auction. And I'm sure you recall this night, because that night you bid on an item and I was chairing the auction, and I was so thankful that you got the item, but another gentleman in the audience also bid on the item, and I took his bid as well. And his bid was $500 less than your bid, which caused you to get a little upset during the event. And it kind of stopped the show. And being my first time doing that kind of thing, I learned that evening that there are rules to the whole auction and event category of charity. And I learned that lesson that night, that if you sell an item for one price, you got to sell that same item, if you sell it again, for the same price to the next guy. So that was one lesson you taught me that evening, and that was almost 12 years ago, I think.
I so appreciate our friendship. We met probably 20 years ago, but in the last 5 years, our friendship has become very close. Your thoughts, ideas, perspective, and outlook on life has been an inspiration. You are so good at communicating and getting your point across in so many different and interesting ways. I remember a while back, we were at an event together at CenturyLink, and I was talking to our newly elected mayor, Jean Stothert. When I finished my conversation, I walked away, and you came up to me and asked me if I would introduce her to you. As I recall, you did not support her during her campaign. As a matter of fact, you were very active in support of another candidate. We walked over to Jean, I introduced you, and you gently grabbed Jean's hand, and you used her hand to slap your own face. You then said, "Jean, I am sure I deserve this." It was a funny and effective means to initiate the conversation. I thought to myself, that guy's good. He took what could have been a strained conversation and made it into a productive one. That has never happened to me after a girl slaps my face. Happy birthday, Mike. Thanks for our friendship and all that you've done for our community.
You know, it's really kind of funny looking back over when I first came to Sacred Heart. Mike was one of the first people that I got to know, because Mike and Lynn were chairing the first gathering. And at that time, you know, I remember the night he emceed and, you know, did a really good job. And little did I know back then that 16 years later, I would be having the chance to talk about a really, really important person in my life, because that's what you have become. And I cherish everything that has brought us to where we're at today.
In my past, I ran an organization through Share Our Strength, a local event called Taste of the Nation. And in 2007, Mike and Lynn Simmonds were our honorary chair couple for this event. And I really learned of his passion for the cause of hunger relief, especially childhood hunger, in having him as our honorary chair for that event. And yeah, I just really admired him for his tenacity to not only have a local charity event, but to make sure voices were listened to and our message was conveyed, and we raised adequate dollars to serve our mission. And with that, I have great admiration and respect for both Lynn and Mike Simmonds for helping us.
Mike and I visit and have coffee on a regular basis, and that's been going on for a number of years. And really, when he started to get more engaged with our company as a board member, I would hit him offline, and we would either meet to follow up on board meeting topics or just talk about business in general between board meetings. And it wasn't too long that we actually started spending, I'd say, 3/4 of the time actually talking about everything but business. So I'd say the last number of years, it's probably been more a personal relationship than a business, but we'd always weave in the business part. And since I had gotten to know Mike so well and knew that I could get that candid feedback, the business discussion didn't take too long. We always dove right to it and still accomplished what we wanted from a business perspective, even though we'd spend a majority of our time just visiting about personal things.
We go back, I think, a long way, Mike and I, in the same business, food. You know, he sold hamburgers and I sold pizza, and I think that is a common denominator. I mean, those are two of the most popular foods on the planet, and known him from a long, long time ago. He was Omaha, I was based Omaha. Our companies grew. I grew in several other states, but he sort of focused on the Midwest area with his Burger Kings, and did a great job. Just a super, super job. And I think it's that entrepreneurial spirit that we both probably have in one way or another. And I think that's the ability, and I've said this before, the ability to be able to see things other people don't see and take advantage of situations and keeping track of the details. I think our philosophy has been everything matters. And some people say don't worry about the small stuff. Well, we usually worry about everything, and then there's no big stuff to really worry about if all the small things are taken care of. Mike is a car guy, and I like that. I like a lot of the automobiles he's owned, the way he cares for those automobiles. Frequently trades, kind of like I do. We all want the new gadgets on the street before anybody else gets them, but true honesty, a very generous person, extremely generous, jovial, upfront guy, honest, you know, all the good things you look for in friends or business or family people. And he and Lynn stand for a lot of the good things in life.
Mike has impacted me directly by allowing me to be me, allowing me to be courageous, and he does that by supporting you, but also by challenging you. He's been my toughest customer, and I say that in terms of his philanthropy, expecting returns on investment and outcomes and all the things that one should expect, but also challenging me as a leader. And as the board president of Methodist Hospital Foundation, he asked the tough questions. He made the most dynamic board leader because he was willing to ask the tough questions.
Hard to believe it's been 30 plus years since we first met each other. I got to know you when Paula left Omaha National Bank back in the early 1980s and went to work for SRM, and pretty crazy times back then from my memories. Great business and social dinners with you and Lynn and the Hopmans and Kavanaughs and many others. Not to mention a few of Paula's famous Danish luncheons along the way. I remember one restaurant dinner in particular. I think we were at an Oriental restaurant in Old Mill with Hopmans and Kavanaughs, and I had to laugh in later years because you always said that that meal was the result of that. One of the results of that meal was an addition to your family, who is Sean, and something about an excess of Mai Tais that evening, if I remember right. I always thought that was pretty funny. I always meant to tell Sean he should probably send a thank you note to the restaurant on his birthday every year, since he's with us because of that. I really only knew you as Paula's boss for the first 25 years or so. We saw a lot of each other at dinners and fundraisers and BK conferences and other business events, and never a lot of one-on-one time, but boy, did we have a lot of fun. We went on a bunch of entertaining and exciting trips through that period, and you were always very gracious at letting Paula drag me and Michael around as we flew back and forth across the country. Michael was, needless to say, a very well-traveled kid by the time he was 16. Orlando, New York, Chicago, Bahamas, Denmark, France. The kid made a lot of trips with us. And we have a map at home that shows all of those, and we take a look at it every now and then, and brings back even better memories. He became, needless to say, very comfortable with your travel style, and I'll never forget after we had been on many of these trips, we had a family trip across western Nebraska and stayed at a pretty nice Holiday Inn, and he was about 10 years old, and he walked in the room and took a look around and looked up at me and said, "Boy, what a dump." And I suppose after staying in the Four Seasons and Ritz-Carltons, I sort of understood where that was coming from. I know he felt like you guys were part of his extended family, and as the rest of us did, and still are part of that extended family. Both of you have always been there for Paula and Michael and myself, and we're very grateful for knowing you and being able to spend the time together that we've had. I did get to spend a little bit more quality time with you in these later years as we tried to develop a couple of business concepts, the concierge medicine practice and the cancer second opinions, and even though those weren't particularly successful in terms of what we had hoped they would do, I got to know you from a very direct perspective, and really appreciated the opportunity of understanding the depth and knowledge of your business experience. That up close and personal thing really meant a lot to me, and I developed a great appreciation and admiration for what you've done in the business world over all these years. Your work ethic and wealth of business knowledge, I think, were the things that struck me so significantly during that time, and it certainly has been no surprise that you've had the success that you've had. Those two skills are pretty important in terms of creating your own luck. Some of our business conversations and meetings were a bit challenging at times, but I always felt like I learned a lot from you, and will always be thankful for having that chance to work together. So, happy birthday, Mike. I really appreciate the years we've had and everything you've done for me and our family.
I've hosted a golf tournament out west. Steamboat Springs was one of the years for the past 30-some years, and Mike came to it. And here Mike came in with his brand new ping clubs, a beautiful leather bag, and he and I were going to be partners. I thought, my God, this is something. Way to go, I picked out a good partner. And so first tee, he pulls out his clubs, and they still got all the plastic wrappers on them. All he had done that day before he came out was go get fitted for these very expensive ping golf clubs. And it was a scramble that day, and it was a gambling event. And Mike and I were partners. It was an every other ball. Well, most of the day, we always were using my every other ball. But we came to 18 with about 30, I think there's about 36 guys surrounding the green. We were the last group coming in. And we didn't think we were in the match, but lo and behold, we happened to be in first place. And all we needed to do was a scramble. So I hit the drive, Mike dribbled one about 12, 15 yards. I hit the next shot on the par 5, and it got in the bunker. We got up to the green, they said, Willie, how are you and Mike doing? I said, well, you know, we're about 4 or 5 under. They said, my God, if you can get a bogey today, you guys can win this thing. So my third shot happened to be in the bunker. Now, Mike has trouble hitting the ball on land, yet alone out of a bunker. So Mike gets in the bunker and takes this mighty swing, moves probably 10 yards of sand out of the bunker, and the ball comes out about 30 feet from the pin. I thought, wow, this is great. All we got to do is 2-putt and we win. Well, I didn't hit a very good putt. I left him about 6 feet. And Mike hadn't made a putt all day long. All day long hadn't made a putt, not even close. So he gets up with all these guys standing around it, and he knocks the ball in the hole. And we won the tournament. I think it was a bigger thrill for me than it was for Mike, because Mike really didn't quite know what was going on until we got all this cash. So that's one great story.
One time Mike and I went on a bike ride in Aspen, and he scared me to death. I thought he was going to have a heart attack, and we were really far away from anywhere where we could get help. But he acted like he could do it, and then once we got out there, he was huffing and puffing and saying he couldn't do it, and oh my gosh, I was so scared. But we've laughed about it since, and afterwards he went out and bought a motorized bike. So that would never happen again. So he wanted to continue to go on those rides and the beautiful scenery, but not on a bike that he had to pedal. But Mike can do that. He can do whatever he wants, and that's what's great about him.
One more thing, Mike, before I forget. I still wear the watch. I have worn it every day since you gave it to me about 10 years ago, and I think of you a lot when I have it on, and I'll be passing this down, I'm sure, to my son as his legacy, and he'll be doing the same. So many thanks again.
Probably 2 stories, really. Probably more a client-vendor relationship type of story. Mike has, a lot of trees in his yard, and it seems like every single storm that blows through his yard, at least one tree blows over. And Mike jokingly likes to tell me that I sabotage his trees, so that when storms do come through, I make sure I have an ongoing log of business to attend to. Because when trees blow over in Mike's yard, it's not a small chore to clean them up, as we've cleaned trees out of his pool and off his driveway and several other areas in his yard. And so I think it's funny whenever a tree blows over. And ironically, last weekend a tree blew over in his yard, and I had nothing to do with it. And then more recently this spring, Mike took time out of his own busy schedule to, I'm part of a business group here in town where I have some other colleagues that I meet with, and every 3 months we give a speech on what we do, and I decided I'd have Mike come and speak for me. It was the first time anyone's ever brought a client of theirs in. And I was, he more than volunteered. I was blown away by that. And instead of me asking him questions, it turned into a roast Dan session, which everyone enjoyed, but he still gave me my, my due credits when I need my due credits. But everyone always asks me how my client Burger King is doing. So.
But he tells me stories about back in the beginning of the Burger King and how he would be out with his wife and young kids in Fremont, and they'd go by the Burger King, and he would go in to check and see how things were working. And he'd describe how a hamburger is supposed to have 4 pickles on the top and a stripe of mustard and ketchup, and not 2 stripes but 1. And if they weren't making it right, he would stay there. His family would wait in the car until he perfected it. And that restaurant today still stands out in the Burger King system.
I had a go-kart as a young man, a Burger King go-kart. My dad would take me to work with him at his first Burger King in Fremont, and he'd throw me in the manager's office, small little 4-foot by 4-foot room, and he'd lock me in there while he went to work. And yeah, it was an experience. I grew up around that.
You know, Mike's the kind of guy that whenever you see him, it always brings a smile on your face because he's happy, he's sincere, and there's always a lot of action around Mike, whether it's going out for a drink with him or serving on a board with him or even going to a concert. I remember we were at the Springsteen concert and he sat a row or two in front of us, and all of a sudden the security guard had a problem with a gentleman that was in an area he wasn't supposed to be in. And the security guy grabbed this guy and he was having a bit of a tussle with him until Mike jumped up and pinned him against the hand railing. I thought, man, that guy's good.
I met Mike back in 1981 when he had an office in the same building I did, and he was a super nice guy to me back then. One of the cool things about Mike was he would always have a neat car, and he would always be very friendly about letting you drive it. Well, you know, I was 22, 23 years old, and so I can remember driving one of his brand new white Corvettes around the interstate and having fun with it. And that was, you know, kind of how we first met, was in that building.
When I started my business and moved in an office, he was in the same office building. He had 6 Burger Kings at the time, I think. And so I moved in that office building, and so we both had our offices, and that's where we really met.
One thing I've always enjoyed about Mike is his love of cars, and he's had some exceptional cars. I've always thought one of these days maybe Mike will sell me one of his second owner, but he had an Aston Martin one time that I was just absolutely in love with. I mean, it was just a beautiful car. This is maybe, I don't know, 5, 7 years ago. And I remember one day he told me the story of he thought he had it in reverse, but he had it in drive, and he went over a curb stop, and those things only sit about, I don't know, maybe 6 inches off the ground, and he caught it on the curb stop. So when he backed up, he managed to, I think, remove the bumper from the car. Of course, there's not many places in Omaha that can replace a bumper for an Aston Martin. I think it went off to, I don't know, Denver, Chicago, or somewhere. I said, Mike, I'd love to see that car, but I don't want to see it with the bumper off. Ah, what a story. What a guy.
I'm his car guy. That's how he usually introduced me. One time I'll never forget, we're at the Porsche races and he introduced me as his friend Eric, and that kind of made my heart drop right out when I heard that. And you know, from that point on, I kind of realized we're a little more than just a car guy. But that's how he'll tell you who I am. I'm a car guy. I just take care of it. He doesn't want to know details, just get it done. So.
I mean, the story that I would tell was when we first met. You know, he drives all these fancy cars, and he had a fancy convertible, and we were. They didn't have garages at the office building, so there was just a little outdoor. What do you call them? The little enclosures, the little carport. There was a carport, you know, the little carport. So he had a carport, and he used to drive this fancy convertible into the carport with the top down, leave the keys in, and go inside the office. And the car was just there with the keys in it, sitting there. You know, Omaha, Nebraska, I guess you can do that.
I don't know if you could do it today in 2014.
No, yeah, I know, but he used to do that all the time. I kept saying, did you leave the keys in the car for me?
He allowed me to drive one of his Porsches on a racetrack, which is just so far beyond anything I could ever have imagined being able to do. And I mean, there's not a day goes by I don't think about that, and you know, how he allowed me to do that. And just, I mean, it's always something new with a car. You'll go to his house, you know, all of a sudden there's a whole different car sitting there. It's like, where'd this come from? Oh, I ordered it a few months ago. You know, yeah, I'm a car guy, and I don't even know he's getting these cars. So, but yeah, that's what's fun. It's never a dull moment. Things are always changing with him, and that's one of the other things I love about him.
one of the things, like I've talked about, Mike always has neat cars in his garage, and I used to race sports cars. So I always had a affinity to some of these hot cars. Well, I brought my 19-year-old son over, who's Graham Nabity. He's played football for the Cornhuskers right now, and he's enamored by cars too. And so I had the opportunity to drive the Aston Martin, and Graham had the opportunity to drive his son's race Porsche that it's on the street, but it really belongs on the track. So we both drove the cars out to a certain location. We switched, and then we both drove them back. And I mean, it's a life-changing experience to be in that fine of a car that fast and be able to go out and have some fun with it. So he never quit being generous with allowing people to have a good time with the cars that he has.
One thing actually happened just recently that was an error on my part, which I think it's kind of funny. He didn't think so at the time, but I chauffeured him and Lynn down to the airport, and I forgot to check for child safety locks. So I'll get out of the car, go start helping with the baggage, and he's stuck in his own car in the back seat. So that's one thing I learned from him is if you ever chauffeur, make sure the passenger's out of the car first. So, yeah. He wasn't afraid to tell you where you went wrong, which is great. And like I said, you just take it and learn from it. So, but yeah, that one, I still giggle about that because I felt not this tall.
April 15, 2005 with my cancer. And I really didn't know what was going on for probably 3 or 4 weeks. And my wife and I, we just started a new business, had 3 kids, 17, 14, and 10. So Mike jumped in right away, and he, Gordy Hopman, Timmy O'Brien, and John Houlihan sent a letter out to my golfing buddies. And they said, he needs our help. So lo and behold to me, I wasn't aware that they had sent a letter out, and they raised a tremendous amount of money that they put in my wife's account, a family trust, medical trust, just so that she wouldn't have to worry about money. And then Mike would talk to her once a week about the business, at breakfast, dinner, and he was sort of one of the main 4 that really jumped in and completely helped us. I mean, we would have just been helpless. And we've just been so fortunate to have Mike and Lynn as such good friends over these past, got going on 10 years now since my cancer. And he would always pick me up. When I was in the hospital for 7 months. When I finally got out, he called up one day and he said, "Willie, you want to go have lunch?" He was thinking about buying these Jimmy John things or whatever it was. So I said, yeah. So he picks me up. I think it was either Bentley or new Maserati. And I come out and I had a walker. And he said, "You want to drive?" I said, I really don't think I want to drive this, this car at all. But we continue to talk, and he's been such a generous man to my family. And I think that's how you really judge an individual, is how do they treat your family? And he's always been there for Dagmar, for my kids, for myself. So his generosity is enormous.
The one I was thinking of was when we were on the cruise, and Mike had his stateroom was right under the. But what is that? The captain's?
Right under the bridge.
Right under the bridge.
He had the presidential stateroom, which is like 2 or 3 bedrooms with this huge, living room and balcony overlooking the water, and this small ship on the Regent Cruise Lines that we were on, and go ahead.
but it was right under the bridge where the captain stood, and there was no smoking. There was no smoking policy. But Mike, took his cigar out and started smoking out on his porch, and the smoke fumes went up to the bridge right where the captain was standing. So the next day he received a nice letter from the captain asking him not to smoke on the ship any longer. I mean, that's Mike.
So what does Mike do? He continues to smoke on the ship, saying, I paid for the most expensive cabin on the ship. I'm doing it. I don't care what they say. So he keeps smoking cigars, and I think then the captain came down to talk to him about it, and then he smoked again, after the captain left, and then he got this note that said, if you smoke one more time, you'll be kicked off the ship at the next port.
So I think the next day, then he ended up going to the cigar room, and he had a cigar with the captain.
Yeah, the captain was in there having a cigar, and they're laughing about the whole thing.
So that was a great story. But I think the other part was on that cruise, how we went to see the night show, and Mike had his own show that he was watching as he was videotaping me.
Oh.
As I kindly fell asleep during the show, Mike had his camera on fast speed or something, and he kept flashing pictures as I went. Throughout the night. That was pretty fun.
And then the lights came on, and as a joke, we all stood up and left her, and she's laying there on the bench sleeping, and this little old Indian woman from India came up and tapped his shoulder and said, excuse me, the show's over. And Mike just started rolling laughing after that one. So it was hilarious.
My wife was coming to dinner with us, and I had had several dinners with you before, so I had experienced this already. But I told Janine, I said, don't be surprised if across the table a fork comes across and takes a bite off your plate. I said, don't worry, that's just Mike going around the table trying everybody's food to see what it tastes like. And I always know that you liked hot sauce a lot, and it was the spicier the better for you. So
The one thing I learned from him, though, is he's got this sandwich that he makes called Daddy's Good Egg Sandwich. And he makes it, and it's like probably one of the most unhealthy sandwiches you could ever eat. But it's like he takes the whole pound of bacon and throws it in the fry pan. And then he has these eggs that he makes, and he puts them under the oven to crisp everything up. And it tastes amazing, full of butter, and he can whip those out pretty quick. But that was something he made for all of his kids when they were little, Daddy's Good Egg Sandwich. So I make that for my kids now.
I look at years and years of all sorts of meetings, all sorts of meals. That's one thing we know we've had a lot of together. We kind of share that same love for food. And you know what? You've always been that eating companion that was ready to go. And when I thought that I was at my full point, you were ready to say, come on, let's do dessert. And I think of all the many, many meals that, you and Lynn and Jen and I have had together over the years. And I'm grateful for those.
We went on a lot of fun trips with them. And I guess I should be thankful because a lot of fun life experiences, other countries, and my husband and I weren't world travelers, so we didn't, but Mike always had everything scheduled and planned in the funnest places, the neatest places, the best food. But one time, and I know Mike was so mad at me, we went to a place where they served raw food, raw fish and I just couldn't do it. I could not do it. And I think he was really ticked at me, but sorry, Mike. But, we did so many fun things, and I'm just so grateful that he did that, gave us those opportunities, because both my husband and I it was so fun. It was fun being with him because you just could be yourself. I mean, we were good friends.
There's two things I like to mention. One time we went to Ireland in 1991, and when we were over there, we ran into some inclement weather. And Mike and Moens went out to find jackets, and both of them are sometimes fashion statements. And they bought 2 of these Irish oil can yellow raincoats, and they paraded those around when we were over there for 8 days. But I would bet you dollars to a donut that those never made it back to the USA. They were so ugly. They stood out in the crowd, and we never had to look too far to find out where Mike and Moens were. Another time that Mike has always been the one that's organized all of our trips, and he especially enjoys going to New York City. And we had a forum trip in there where everybody went on the forum trip with spouses, and we happened to pick the week that there was a strike of all the theater companies in New York City. And so we didn't have many choices. But Mike, being decisive, being the one that he is, he had 2 choices. He could either choose Mary Poppins, which was a Disney movie, or going to the Ritz. And the Ritz is really based upon a hotel located in Cleveland. It was about gay people, and it was a very interesting evening. We were very disciplined. We stayed to the bitter end, but afterwards I walked up to Mike and I said, maybe next time, Mike, we should choose Mary Poppins. It's a little bit more my style. So
we went to dinner in Mexico, and we had dinner at a restaurant, and I don't know what he had to eat for dinner, but obviously it wasn't hot enough for him. So he went to the waiter, and he told the waiter.
He had the hot sauce they brought, and it wasn't hot enough. And he goes, bring me the hottest hot sauce you have. That's what I want. And so he goes and he puts, what did he put in there? He dipped his, put all over his taco or whatever it was, and took a bite. And I've never seen his eyes started watering, his like, started sweating. It was like immediately, he was like sweating this. He's like, starts drinking his water like crazy. And then it's like, he goes, you got me on that one. He tells us later, after he commented, you got me on that one. What was that stuff?
That was the hottest stuff.
It was the hottest stuff
That was
ever.
so funny.
He thought Mr. Iron Stomach could handle it. But
Yeah.
That was funny. Anything else?
When I was a young man, he snuck up, I don't know, probably 6, 7 years old, and he walked up to my bedroom, and he was wearing a terrible mask, and he was making monster noises, and I saw him. It scared the shit out of me. I probably crapped my pants. Not sure though. But what I do know, and I heard about this later, is I ended up sleeping in bed with him for weeks, both him and my mother. So, he got to practice that on me, and he's never done that to another kid. And
when Natalie asked me to do this, and it said I'd have 15 minutes, I couldn't think of 15 minutes worth of nice things to say about Mike. But as I thought about it more, I could spend an hour talking about the great things about Mike. First thing that came to mind were some of the great stories we've had as members of the YPO Forum together, some trips we've taken. And one evening, Mike was staying at the Las Vegas Hotel, and he was in a deep sleep. He accidentally hit the power button on a television set at the end of his bed, which he was unaware of. And then suddenly, out of a deep sleep, an 80-inch TV rises from the table at the end of his bed and kept him awake the rest of the night. And another evening when we kidnapped Doris from the display window in a woman's clothing store and took her bar hopping with us and rafting in Vail, Colorado. He'll have to explain to his family if that ends up on the video. But Mike has been a very successful business person. He's very philanthropic. He's been a great community leader, and he's a culinary wizard. And as I said earlier, he really is one of the most interesting people that I've ever met.
When I first met Mike as a patient, he came to see me. I was at the Nebraska Medical Center. We went through the whole patient-doctor visit, and we sat down and talked about a plan and how we could go about all this. And then at the end of it, he said, "Can I ask you a personal question?" I said, "Sure." He said, "How the hell does somebody like you do what you're doing in this community and me not know?" Which was an interesting reflection on how poor our own marketing is. And some of those things, but it's actually then the conversation that led to us and the development of Members MD. Having an opportunity to work and build a business with him has been one of the great achievements in my life.
Mike and I, we have been friends for nearly 3 decades. And for many, many years,
every Saturday when we are both in town, we meet for coffee for a couple of hours. We try and solve the world's problems, not with much success, as you may have noticed. But one particular Saturday, a number of years ago, we decided to go downtown for breakfast. And we went down to one of the cafes in the old market, and we are sitting there enjoying our breakfast and our conversation, and we look around and we see there's a couple having breakfast at every single table. And we look at each other and we go, Valentine's Day. We had completely forgotten it was Valentine's Day. We had not invited Cindy, we had not invited Lynn, so we quickly settled our bill and headed back out west to make it up to our wives. But during that period of time where we have met on Saturdays, often we talk politics. Mike started out very conservative. I started out very liberal. And over a number of years, we moved each other towards the political center. And as a result, neither of us is represented in Washington nowadays. I think those are the stories.
After we'd go out with them or something, you know, Mike would do some things where I could just see the kill in Lynn's face, you know, or, you know, she'd want to fall in a hole and not come out. But we used to laugh, and I'd say, you know, the one thing I really like about Mike is he is truly genuine. What you see is what you get. And Mike is Mike. And I know Mike is Mike got him in trouble a lot, but, you know, he's not a simple guy. He's smart, he's complicated, and he's super generous. I mean, you can't even imagine all the people and places and organizations and stuff he's given to, and I can't even begin to tell you, but a lot of it was behind the scenes, which makes him even more special. He's a neat guy.
You know, pushing other people is, it's like setting examples or setting the bar. And yeah, if he got something here, I'd want to open another one there. And it was a friendly competition, spirited, and not in bad spirits. It was positive spirited. And yeah, he is very competitive, very, very competitive in what he does, but on the same side, very generous and sharing on the other. So he's a food guy. I think we could probably, and I've been called one, but I would clearly call him a food maven. And if you look that maven up, he's a person that's very knowledgeable in the business and willing to share those ideas with others.
It's just that throughout my life I've been blessed with really good friends, and for that I'm very grateful. But Mike's friendship, of his love and his laughter and his arguments, because he and I like to get into some arguments. The first time I met him, we got into an argument. And he introduced Jim and I of the How to Travel, which we would have never been introduced to had it not been for Mike and Lynn. Enjoyed all of that.
Mike, you're a great big guy, and I appreciate all you've done for the charities that I have been involved with, because you've been a huge supporter, and I extremely, extremely, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate all that you've done to support me in the causes. Thank you.
Hey, Mike, I want to wish you the God's best. You fought one tough battle. It's been impressive to see. It's been a privilege and a pleasure to have you as a friend and to work through a lot of tough issues with the city of Omaha. And your loyalty to me has meant everything to me. And I love you and I appreciate you. And I pray that God blesses and anoints you in miraculous ways.